Welcome to Black Spring. Last winter, you may remember from the impeachment inquiry and the impeachment hearings that, of course, there were committees formed and a selected group of constitutional scholars. Well, amongst those scholars was a constitutional scholar by the name of Jonathan Turley. Now, Jonathan Turley provided a bit of a he provided a bit of a different logic and a different reasoning, and he cited law a bit more modest than the other scholars on the panel. Now, that brings me to this evening's story, in which we have a bit of a swipe or a return of a swipe from Jonathan Turley. I'd like to thank everybody for joining me on this segment of Black Spring with Autumn. Now, this comes from The Blaze. Now, this article was written on May 9th, 2020. Here, we have liberal law professor punches back at Obama for claiming Flynn's dismissal puts the rule of law at risk. How's that for precedent? Now, this was written by Chris Enlow. Constitutional scholar Jonathan Turley hit back at former President Barack Obama on Saturday over his assertion that, quote, the rule of law is at risk, end quote, after the Department of Justice dropped all charges against Michael Flynn. Obama said on Friday, Yahoo News reported, the news over the last 24 hours, I think, has been somewhat downplayed about the Justice Department dropping charges against Michael Flynn. And the fact that there is no precedent that anybody can find for someone who has been charged with perjury just getting off scot-free. That's the kind of stuff where you begin to get worried about that basic, not just institutional norms, but our basic understanding of rule of law is at risk. And when you start moving in those directions, it can accelerate pretty quickly, as we've seen in other places. According to Turley, a self-avowed liberal, Obama's comments revealed how personally invested he was in the Flynn case. Quote, it is a curious statement. First and foremost, Flynn was not charged with perjury, end quote, Turley began. Second, we know Obama discussed charging Flynn under the Logan Act, which has never been used successfully to convict anyone and is flagrantly unconstitutional, end quote, he continued. Quote, third, this reaffirms reports that Obama was personally invested in this effort, end quote. But according to Turley, there is precedent for the Justice Department's sudden decision, and Obama should look no further than his own Attorney General Eric Holder. Quote, finally, there is precedent, end quote. Turley wrote, quote, there is a specific rule allowing for this motion under Federal Rule of Criminal Procedure 48A. There are specific Supreme Court cases like Rinaldi versus the United States addressing the standard for such dismissals, end quote. Quote, the Justice Department has dismissed cases in the past, including the Stevens case, end quote, Turley explained. Quote, that was requested by President Obama's own Attorney General Eric Holder for the same reason, misconduct by prosecutors. It was done before the same judge, Judge Sullivan. How is that for precedent? While people of good faith can certainly disagree on the wisdom or basis for the Flynn motion, it is simply untrue if President Obama is claiming that there is no precedent or legal authority for the motion, end quote, Turley wrote on his website. I'd like to thank everybody for joining me on this segment of Black Spring with Autumn. Now here, once again, this is not the first time that the constitutional scholar Jonathan Turley has contradicted and fact-checked the Democrat Party or their caucus or their procedural references or their legal references when it comes to precedents. Now, you can also remember, if you remember, that scholar Jonathan Turley also, he questioned the rhetoric. He basically cited the rhetoric behind the impeachment case and just generally called it out and said that it was manufactured and that it was quite thin, and that, of course, like a home, you need a foundation before you can actually have a house and then call it a home. Not only that, he's historically quoted that this would be the thinnest, the absolute thinnest case for impeachment in history. And even a finer moment than that, I'm paraphrasing here, Jonathan Turley went on to say that Washington's, quote, Washington's powdered hair would catch on fire for impeachment over talking to another head of state. So, here again, we have the simple case of more projection from the left, which also seems to implicate or seems to affirm what Jonathan Turley mentions about Obama's own involvement or his own interest in the case. So, let me know what you think. Do you think that constitutional scholar Jonathan Turley is off with his citing of the precedents for the Flynn charges being dropped? Or do you think that Obama is simply deflecting or creating a diversion to maybe stay above the fray? Or do you think this is just more smoke and mirrors in this election cycle? I'd like to thank everybody for joining me on this segment of Black Spring with Autumn. And also, if you could hit the like or the unlike or the subscribe button or the share button, all of those elements help with the platform of Black Spring. Thank you so much for joining me on this segment.